To the latest news now on the vaccine rollout. The Prime Minister repeated his promise to Canadians today that anyone who wants a vaccine will get one by September. That target has been in doubt recently due to cuts in vaccine deliveries from both Pfizer and Moderna. Here's Trudeau speaking earlier.
The turbulence week over week that we're seeing is of concern, and we're watching it closely and we're staying on it. But let me reassure people, we are still very much on track, as promised, to get those 6 million doses by the end of March, because that's what the vaccine company CEOs keep telling me.
So is the Prime Minister's word and the word of pharmaceutical CEOs enough for Canadians to pin their hopes on? Stephen McKinnon is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement. John Barlow is an Alberta Conservative MP and a member of the Standing Committee of Health. And Don Davies is the NDP health critic. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for having me.
Steve McKinnon, I'd like to start with you today. A lot of reassurance from the Prime Minister, and I'm sure some Canadians are looking for reassurance, but a lot are looking for results. How confident are you that these delivery targets are going to be met by the end of the first quarter, given that the week-to-week numbers seem to change with great frequency and never in the right direction?
Well, I would take issue with the premise of that question, David, and good evening to my colleagues and to you. Thank you for having me on. Indeed, 1.4 million doses of vaccine have already entered Canada and presumably have gone into the system of immunizations in the provinces and territories. We expect those deliveries to continue, as the Prime Minister said, through March, where 6 million doses of already approved vaccines will have arrived, and then ramping up rather significantly in the second quarter of the year and again in the third, such that every Canadian who wishes to have a vaccine will have one. We have enough doses of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines ordered, contracted for on behalf of the Canadian people, to vaccinate every Canadian who wishes to have one. Of course, if additional vaccine candidates were to be approved, AstraZeneca and others that we've had encouraging clinical data from, clinical trial data, then those would be added as we progress through the year to those totals and would be shipped to the provinces. And that would, of course, redouble the logistical requirements of the provinces to vaccinate people. So, look, we're confident. We set this course last summer of diversifying our vaccine supply, and within that vaccine supply, manufacturers, manufacturing locations. And of course, those manufacturers are ramping up to meet the crushing demand of the entire world. And we are pushing just as hard as any country, believe you me, to get those doses on Canadian soil. We feel the urgency.
Right.
We understand people want these vaccines, and we are acting with great dispatch, and no one should be under any illusions that the Canadian government isn't on the job 24 hours a day,
right,
trying to get those vaccines landed in Canada as quickly as possible.
But Mr. McKinney, if you look at this 4-week lull of the interruption in the Pfizer supplies because of upgrades in Belgium, which I know you cannot control, and the reduced deliveries from Moderna, and we know the next Moderna shipment will likely be reduced, that's about 1 million doses that haven't shown up in the anticipated time frame. And I know you have the reassurances from the drug companies that they will make the first quarter delivery deadline. But what hammer does the government of Canada have if they don't deliver the full 6 million doses? I mean, the contracts, as we understand them, say they will make their best efforts. What if their best efforts come short? What recourse does the government of Canada have? What can you do to push the drug companies?
Well, we have contracts for doses of vaccine that are on a quarterly basis. Then the vaccine companies, of course, inform us on a regular basis the pace of those deliveries within a given quarter. The companies, as you just indicated, are ramping up their manufacturing capability, not just in Europe, but around the world. Mm-hmm. And we will be continuing to receive increased numbers of doses now as we progress through the first quarter, and then, of course, ramping up significantly into the second quarter. We are given those reassurances on a very regular basis. And that's because we ask the companies for those reassurances on a regular basis. And when they have bad news to deliver, as they in fact did a couple of weeks ago with some temporary delays, we of course have to pass that along. But right now, we are reassured that those 6 million doses will be on Canadian soil before the end of March.
Mr. Barlow, I'd like to bring you in here if I could. I mean, your leader, Mr. O'Toole, has been critical of the government of this, saying that it's failing Canadians on the vaccine rollout program. But if Pfizer decides to stop production at its plant to do upgrades, and Moderna says it's having trouble scaling up to meet demand in Switzerland, is that really the government of Canada's fault when those are the only 2 vaccines that are approved for use in this country right now?
Well, I think it's a matter of, if we want to know what, the minister today was talking about obligations, that these companies have obligations to meet. We want to know what those obligations are. And if Mr. McKinnon is so confident that they're going to have delivery of these vaccines, why are they dipping into the COVAX agreement, which we know is vaccines for poorer countries?
But are you saying they shouldn't take the COVAX doses, sir? Because it was announced on September 25th of last year when Canada contributed the money. This was part of its dose procurement plan. Are you saying they should say no to these?
No, I think they have said over and over again that there's more than enough vaccines to vaccinate Canadians, and yet we've seen 0 doses delivered in the last 10 days. We want to know what obligations are part of those contracts. We've seen AstraZeneca and Pfizer release their contracts with the United States, the European Union, United Kingdom. We want to have the minister negotiate the release of those contracts for Canadians. Canadians want to see. Yes, that is correct. And Canadians want to see if those pharmaceutical companies don't meet the obligations of having the vaccines delivered at the end of this quarter, are there cash penalties? Are there any obligations for them to meet that? If they don't meet it, then what happens? And why did the government negotiate the delivery of these vaccines on a quarterly basis and not monthly like other countries? Okay, we have now heard that we are paying significantly more for vaccines than other countries, and yet we're getting fewer and fewer deliveries than those other countries. So what is in those contracts? Who negotiated it? Those are the questions that Canadians want to ask.
Okay, I want to bring Mr. Davies in here, but first, a couple of quick things. I think 180,000 doses of Moderna were delivered this week. They arrived in Canada on Thursday, and 79,000 Pfizer this week. And the AstraZeneca contract with the EU was released after a mutual negotiation, but is also...
Still, less than 10% of what we were promised.
Absolutely, not disagreeing there. But the AstraZeneca contract, Mr. Davies, may I bring you in here, released by the EU, was heavily redacted and done only through negotiations between the 2 contracting partners. But going back to my question about the supply, given what we know about why Pfizer is interrupted and why Moderna is interrupted, what should the government of Canada do if those are the only 2 options for supply right now?
Well, first of all, Mr. Trudeau is concerned about Canadians having anxiety and is concerned about noise. Well, when a government repeatedly is not forthright and when they repeatedly are not transparent and are contradicted by the facts, this is what creates this kind of lack of confidence. If you remember back in December, it was the Ontario government that revealed that we were getting 4 million doses and 2 million from the Pfizer and Moderna contracts. That wasn't the government that told us that. This government still won't release a single contract, even though the U.S. has released both Pfizer and Moderna contracts. Brazil has...
Those are also heavily redacted too, Mr. Davies. I was on the HHS website looking at this, and there's gray box after gray box after gray box. So it's not like everything is out there.
I'd take a redacted contract at this point, because we haven't seen a word of a single contract. So let's just start with that. And by the way, the EU negotiated with AstraZeneca to release part of that. Look, I don't want the whole contract, but I think Canadians have a right to see some basic details. How many doses are we getting? By when? What is the delivery schedules? Those are the kind of things that taxpayers deserve a right to see. Now, I remember last year when Mr. Trudeau talks about credibility, last August, he told Canadians we'd be producing vaccines domestically in this country by the end of last year. He's also told us that EU export exemptions won't apply to us, but we're not on the exemptions list. And then he tells us we have enough vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna to vaccinate every Canadian by September, but then he dips into a fund for 2 million vaccines that is set up, let's face it, primarily to help poor countries. So If there's a credibility problem, if there's anxiety, it's squarely at the foot of this Prime Minister and the government, who have done a poor job negotiating and communicating on this issue.
Mr. McKinnon, just because we're running out of time, on the COVAX doses, it's 1.9 million doses, roughly at minimum, between now and June of AstraZeneca's yet to be approved vaccine. There's been a lot of criticism internally and globally of Canada's decision to take that, because even though an equal amount will go to a low-income or developing country under COVAX, by taking these doses, those are doses that could have gone to, more doses could have gone to low-income countries. Was this the right move for Canada, or are you worried about the implications this has on our reputation as a good global citizen?
Well, once again, it's a circular argument, David, because COVAX functions only if wealthier countries, developed countries, access some portion of their procurements through the COVAX facility. The Part A I like to talk about, such that Part B has negotiating leverage to negotiate on behalf of developing countries and to deliver doses that are paid for, it must be said, by Canadian taxpayers. So Canadians should be very proud of their leadership role.
They aren't.
It's a question of sequencing, though, right?
Canadians should be very Canadians.
The reputation's already tarnished.
That we were among the leaders in this multilateral institution. The United States aren't even members. I hear things about the G7. The United States aren't even members of COVAX. Canada put its money on the table for the developing world
vaccines
as part of the COVAX facility, and that is because COVAX works as a buying group that requires leverage. So Canada devoting some of its procurement of vaccines through COVAX is specifically the point of COVAX.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm going to have to let you go. We will, I'm certain, have you back to talk about vaccines in the future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, David.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Hi, I'm Vassy Kapelos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.